Born into the hard physical labour of a small German gem-cutting village, Christian Rudolph Jerusalem could easily have spent his life at the grinding wheel. Instead, he became something more subtle but far-reaching. As his sons spread across Australia, New Zealand, South America and Europe, a question emerges. How did one man, who never left home for good, help build a global family network? Stay with us as we explore the story of Christian Rudolph Jerusalem, discover the world he lived in and the legacy he helped set in motion. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up, and if you like the content and want more, hit the subscribe button and tap that notification bell. Christian Rudolph Jerusalem was born in 1852 in the village of Seesbach in what was then a dense cluster of gem working communities near Idar and Oberstein, now collectively known as Idar-Oberstein. This was no ordinary rural setting. For centuries, the region had been one of Europe's principal centres for cutting and working stone. Local deposits of agate, jasper, and related materials had sustained generations of craftsmen. By Rudolph's time, however, the industry was already transforming. The local supply was declining, and the trade was reaching outward, drawing in raw materials from places like Brazil and, increasingly, further afield. The work itself remained demanding. Gem cutters and grinders shaped hard stone against large wheels, usually powered by water flowing in the local streams, working long hours in physically taxing conditions. Skill mattered, but so did endurance. This was a world in which knowledge passed from father to son, and Rudolph was firmly within that tradition. His father had worked as a hole maker, drilling stones for use in jewellery. Rudolph followed into the trade as an agate grinder, continuing a line that stretched back generations. In 1876, he married Wilhelmina, known as Mina Wieck, in the nearby village of Herstein. Like Rudolph, she came from a family embedded in the same local industry. Their marriage reflects how closely intertwined these communities were, not just geographically, but economically and socially. They built their life together in Herborn, a small village just a few kilometres from the centre of the trade. And over the following years they raised a large family. Not all of their children survived into adulthood, a reality that remained part of everyday life even at the end of the 19th century. But several sons did, and their paths would carry the family far beyond the boundaries of the Nahi Valley. By the 1890s, Rudolph's own role had begun to shift. Rather than remaining solely at the grinding wheel, he is recorded as a licensed drink seller and dealer in colonial goods. At first glance, this might seem like a step away from the gem trade. In reality, it placed him at a different level within it. In a region built on small workshops and travelling dealers, such premises were more than commercial outlets. They were points of connection. Traders passed through, information was exchanged, and opportunities were recognised. Running a tavern alongside a retail trade gave Rudolph not only income, but position. It is here that we begin to see him less as a craftsman and more as an organiser. Because, around the same time, he was coordinating his son's movements into the wider world. One travelled to the opal fields of New South Wales, at that time one of the most significant sources of opal globally. He later settled in New Zealand, working as a wholesale jeweller and sourcing greenstone for export back to Germany. Another son established himself in South America, near the amethyst and agate fields on the border of Uruguay and Brazil. Others remained closer to the European trade, working either as merchants or within the established gem centres. This was not simply migration in search of opportunity. It reflected a broader pattern within the Idar-Oberstein industry, where families extended themselves across the supply chain. Raw materials were sourced overseas, processed in Germany, and then distributed into wider markets. Trust was essential, and family provided that trust. Rudolph's position, running a business that sat at the intersection of people and goods, may well have helped make this possible. Whether through capital, contacts, or simply a place where plans could be formed, his role appears to have shifted from making stones to enabling movement. The personal cost of this life, however, remained close to home. Tuberculosis, a persistent presence in the industrial towns of the period, claimed first a daughter and then his wife in 1910. Within a few years, the household had changed profoundly. Rudolph, now in his late 50s, was left a widower with a young child still at home. Yet even in this period he did not withdraw. In 1912 he undertook a long journey to New Zealand to visit his son and grandchildren. It was a significant voyage, taking weeks by sea, and not something undertaken lightly at his age. It suggests an ongoing engagement with the wider family network that had grown out from his home village. The years that followed brought further challenges, not only for his family, but for the global trade they were part of. The First World War disrupted international commerce, particularly for German traders working abroad. Rudolph's own sons, who had built lives in other countries, found themselves caught between identities and economies. Business networks that had once flowed relatively freely were strained, interrupted, or in some cases broken. Rudolph himself remained in Herborn throughout this period. He lived into his 70s, dying there in 1929. By that point, the world he had been born into had changed almost beyond recognition. The small, locally focused trade of his childhood had become part of a global system, and his own family was deeply embedded within it. What, then, is his legacy? It is not found in a single record or achievement, but in a pattern that becomes visible over time. A transition from manual labour to commercial positioning. A family that moved deliberately into key points of a global industry. A network that extended across continents, yet remained connected to a small village in Germany. And beyond the gem trade itself, something more enduring. His descendants did not remain confined to a single occupation or place. The movement he helped enable created options. Some continued within the trade, others moved into different fields in different countries. The network evolved, adapted, and in doing so, outlived the specific conditions that had created it. Christian Rudolph Jerusalem did not leave behind a detailed personal record, but he did leave behind a structure, a way of being in the world that combined skill, adaptability, and connection, and through that, a family that was no longer defined by where it began, but by where it could go. Rudolph's story is a good reminder that an ancestor's importance is not always measured by how much is written about them. In cases where personal records are limited, context becomes critical. Understanding the industry, the economic patterns, and the movements of a wider family can reveal far more than any single document. Sometimes, to understand one life, you have to reconstruct the world that made it possible.